It was at my last school, and we were in English class. And we were supposed to read this novel called On the Road by Jack Kerouac. No student, of course, actually read the novel, so we decided to watch the filmed version instead. However, in this filmed version, there was a gay sex scene. And I knew this because our teacher gave us a warning, which I already found quite strange. However, what truly was strange was this sex scene. Not because it was gay, but because it wasn't rather every day, to say the least. When the scene was done, I took a look around the classroom. And I noticed that everyone was looking at me, wondering if this was what gay sex was like. And I, of course, felt extremely embarrassed. And unfortunately, it didn't stop there, because for weeks onwards, there were all these jokes about gay people and gay sex. At some point, I felt so uncomfortable in my own school that I felt unsafe. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because this experience forms the basis of what I'll be talking about today. Because the question I will investigate throughout this talk will be, in which ways is the representation of the queer community in the entertainment misleading, and what are the consequences? Now, to start right off the bat, there's this phenomenon that we call queerbaiting. And since you might not be familiar with it already, I'll explain it to you first. Queerbaiting is a marketing technique used in the entertainment industry when creators hint at, but not actually depict, same-sex romance or other queer representation. They do so to attract, or quite literally bait, a queer or straight ally audience by suggesting them a character or romance that appeals to them, while at the same time attempting to avoid alienating other consumers. So basically, they try to make something seem queer without it actually being queer in order to get more views, to therefore get more money. And unfortunately, there are many, many examples. And I am 100% sure that everyone who's in the auditorium right now will at least know one of these examples. So to start, teen series Riverdale with the characters Betty Cooper and Veronica Lodge. Our beloved children TV series Sesame Street with Bert and Ernie. Or one of the newest Disney movies, Luca, with the characters Luca and Alberto. And last but not least, Pitch Perfect, Becca and Chloe. And this queerbaiting is a phenomenon that we can also see in other industries, such as clothing and music with Katy Perry's I Kissed a Girl. And this queerbaiting is actually part of a bigger phenomenon that we call rainbow capitalism, which is a targeted inclusion of the queer community to generate a market specifically focused on them. And again, they do so to get more money. Now, this rainbow capitalism is especially noticeable during 1 month a year, and that's in June. But why in June? This is since June is considered to be Pride Month, which occurs in the United States to commemorate the Stonewall riots, which happened at the end of June 1969. Nowadays, many Pride events are held all over the world to recognize the impact queer people have had in this world. However, something that's quite remarkable about this month is that on the 1st of June, companies switch their logos into a rainbow-themed one, or they update their clothing line with a rainbow-themed one. And throughout this month, companies are extremely active on all sorts of social media platforms, promoting queer rights and their allyship. However, this allyship is something that we can heavily criticize, because most of these companies don't actually have a safe and inclusive work environment for their queer employees. With, in an extreme case, black trans women work for under less than a living wage. And aside from that, some companies also donate their profits to politicians, but also to politicians with an anti-queer agenda. And I wish, in this case, I was talking about a small entrepreneur working for themselves, donating a few dollars to their favorite politician, No. I am talking about the big companies such as Amazon and McDonald's donating over hundreds of thousands of dollars to these politicians, which make these politicians extremely influential. Now, of course, there's also representation, which is not essentially meant to make money of. However, that does not mean that creators also let go of several tropes. And I will talk about a few of these tropes now. And a small disclaimer, I can only talk about two, because I have a limited amount of time and there are just too many to talk about. And aside from that, I don't even notice all. Because there are so many and they're so normalized in our representation and in the entertainment that even I, as a queer person, don't see them. But I will talk about two that really stand out to me, with the first one being the struggle of being queer. As an example, the first major Hollywood Studios movie with a queer protagonist is Law of Simon, based on a novel called Simon vs. the Homo sapien Agenda. This film centers around Simon Spear, a gay, closeted high school boy struggling to find balance between his friends, his family, and a blackmailer threatening to out him to the entire school, while simultaneously attempting to discover the true identity of an anonymous classmate with whom he has fallen in love with online. Now, the problem with this is not that the protagonist is queer, not at all. The problem is that the whole plot, his whole character, involves about him being queer. Like, why can't there be a movie about a lawyer working on a murder case with her eventually coming home to her wife and children? Or why can't it be about an intense divorce between two gay men? The reasons for this trope come from that throughout the whole process there's not enough representation of the queer community. And even though right now the queer community screams about wanting queer actors to play the roles of queer characters, however, that's only part of the problem, because if we want to solve this problem, we need representation throughout the whole process of writing, creating, and acting. Because for the most part, it's written or created from the lens of a cisgendered and homosexual and heterosexual. Now, the second trope I will talk about is the trope of queer people always dying. And this trope is actually so common that it even has its own name. Bury our gays. Now, the reasons for this trope have actually developed somewhat over the years. For a good while, it was because of the depraved homosexual and the pretty much limited portrayal of gay characters to Fellaini's characters, or at least characters who weren't given much respect by the narrative. This meant that by the end, these characters would die or receive a punishment, and even somewhat sympathetic characters would still receive this punishment as their sexuality was perceived as a negative trait. Similar to how one would write a story about a sympathetic drug addict. However, when sensitivity to the queer community became more mainstream, this then developed into the too good for this sinful earth narrative, where, with the subject of homophobia, queer people were depicted as suffering victims, dying tragic deaths from an uncaring world. The AIDS crisis actually contributed to this, since the tragic AIDS story became its own archetype, popularized by movies like Philadelphia. And then there are the occasions of the but not too gay, and the bait and switch lesbians, where creators managed to get the romance going, but avoid showing it in detail by quickly killing off one of the relevant characters. And statistically speaking, lesbian characters are actually the characters killed off most in the entertainment. Now, these tropes develop into little jokes, but also into prejudices, into mainstream society. And this has detrimental consequences for the queer community, since this then leads to homophobia, but also internalized homophobia. And now I'll shortly explain why. Since basically the only image the entertainment industry shows us is a negative image of queer people. And since not everyone lives in an environment in which there is an out and proud queer person who is willing to share their personal experiences, people only see confirmations of this negative depiction. And they start believing this. And personally, I get it. Because if I would only see gay men laying in gutters dying of AIDS, I also wouldn't want my child to be gay. However, it also works the other way around. Because it also develops internalized homophobia, which is something that I personally struggled with. Because at first, I didn't want to be gay. It wasn't until I had conversations with real queer people who have led a big part of their lives, and who can talk about how normal it is for them to be queer. And it wasn't until then I was able to start accepting myself and to accept my sexuality. Luckily, I was born and I lived in an environment which was overall accepting of my sexuality. However, when this is not the case, the consequences can be way worse. And I will talk about some facts now, so stay with me. I want you to notice, and these are only statistics from the United Kingdom, so that when it comes to numbers, it's much, much bigger. Around 40% of homeless kids right now identify as queer, and around 1 in 5 of queer people have experience with homelessness at some point in their lives. Around 3 in queer people are 3 times more likely to use illegal drugs. Queer people are 6 times more likely to report high levels of depression. Queer people are 14 times more likely to try to commit suicide. Around 2/3 of queer people have had experience with anti-queer violence or abuse. And of these, 9 in 10 have experience with verbal abuse, 3 in 10 with physical abuse, and 2 in 10 with sexual abuse. So, what we can clearly see from these statistics is that the lack of good representation has detrimental consequences for queer people, sometimes even fatal consequences. And then, regarding the rainbow capitalism and the fake allyship, since these companies use the profit that we as consumers give to them, use this to donate to these anti-queer politicians, lives won't get easier for queer people. So if there would be anything I could ask you, is to please be mindful where you buy your food, where you buy your clothes, what series or films you watch, and what music you listen to. Because it might not have an effect on you, it will have an effect on someone else. Someone like me. Thanks for listening to me.